for Nooga Studio and welcome to Paint the Town, our virtual paint party for Startup Week Chattanooga. I'm super excited because today we are painting a portrait of my hometown and favorite place on the planet, Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm so excited that you've decided to join us. Before we get started, you'll want to gather all of the materials you need for this painting. First things first, you'll want either an apron or some paint clothes that you don't mind getting paint on. You will need that self-same paint. I'm using 7 colors. That's what I've got on my palette today. In order, going around the palette for me, those colors are white, yellow, fire red, which is kind of an orangey red, magenta, which is a cooler kind of pinkish red, violet, cobalt blue, and black. Now if you don't have all those colors, don't worry, you can do this with black, white, and just primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, or you can even switch it up and use different colors. Totally up to you. This is a really customizable painting. I'll let you know when to mix colors if you don't have all of those so that you can follow along. You'll also need brushes for this painting. I'm using 3. A 1-inch wash brush that's square on top, a slightly smaller 1/2-inch wash brush, and then a little tiny detail brush, little round brush. I like to keep those in a cup of water. You will need one of those, and that just keeps them nice and fresh, keeps them from rolling off the table and painting your shoes. Nobody wants that. You will also need some chalk, that's optional, or maybe a pencil if you want to kind of get your outlines drawn on first. And then also paper towels, just to catch any drips or spills, and then to dry your brush off between steps. I'm going to be painting straight through, but you can pause this video. I will let you know when there are going to be dry breaks. We're going to kind of do things in sections, and sometimes you're going to want to pause to let your paint dry before you move on to the next step. So just follow along. Don't be afraid to pause. Go at your own pace. Back it up if you need to. This is a really fun painting. It's in layers and it's also really customizable. So if you get creative with it, decide to do something different, I would be super excited to see what you turn out. You'll also need a canvas. I'm using a 16 by 20 canvas, but you could do this on a square, you could do it on something longer, smaller, a wooden board, you name it. But 16 by 20 is my canvas size of choice, so that's what I'm going to be painting on this evening. Once you get all your supplies ready, then we will get started. Let's do it. All right, for the first step of our painting, we're going to be doing this fiery kind of sunset sky. Now, the thing I love about this is that it is kind of an abstract painterly sky. We're not trying to do anything too realistic here. This is a very stylized take on a sunset. So before I get started, I am just going to put a little bit of water all over my canvas, the top half of it. I'm using that 1-inch wash brush. Just a little water. I think that helps the paint blend a little bit easier, just to go ahead and have that water on here. It's a lot neater than trying to mix water into your paint on the palette. It also gets you warmed up, right? Get those brushstroke muscles all warm and limber and ready to go. Okay, so first things first, we are going to kind of double dip in some white and yellow. I'm a lazy painter. I like to mix my colors on the canvas if possible, so I don't never have to mix the same color twice. So I'm just going to double dip and get a scoop of white and a scoop of yellow, like this, right on my brush, together, like I'm getting a whole lot of queso on a chip. And I'm going to make kind of a rainbow shape. It's like a parentheses on its side, like this. Just all the way back and forth. And this is maybe in the top third of the canvas. I'm going to go down a little further than I need to so that we can overlap it. One thing I see beginning painters do sometimes is to be really polite and just take a little bit of paint. You should take a lot of paint. Like it's the last bit of queso that you ordered and you want to eat it yourself. Am I the only one who has that problem? Alright. I'm going to paint the edges of my canvas too. I really like to do that. If you have a canvas that's got the fabric wrapped around the back side, it's really nice to paint the edges, and then you've got kind of an instant frame. Alright, so I've got my little archway there, and we're just going to kind of go around our palette and make a little bit of a rainbow. So I'm not going to wash my brush at all, and I'm going to dip in some of this fire red Now, if you don't have a fire red, but you do just have a regular red, you can mix a little of your red and yellow together to get something kind of orange. And I'm just gonna go right over top of that. It's like we're making a little rainbow. Big stripe of that kind of orangey red right there. I like it. I'm already dripping everywhere. This is why it's important to wear your apron, folks. All right. This doesn't have to be perfect because we are totally going to brush all the way through this. All right, once again, not washing my brush. And I'm going to pick up a little of my magenta, that kind of hot pink color. You could use bright red as well. It's really a red, it's just a cooler red. So if you're just working with primary colors, you could use red all by itself. I'm just going to get those corners all the way up. We want to just cover the whole top half of the canvas with our bright rainbow. And I'm painting the edge, the top edge too. I like this kind of instant frame and wrapping that color all the way around the canvas. There we go. All right, now we want this to be kind of painterly and have this texture to it. So I'm not going to wash my brush, but I am going to wipe the extra paint off with a paper towel. And we are going to kind of stitch back through this while it's wet with some brush strokes. So I'm going to start down here, down low, and I really want to cover up everything that I've already done. You can grab a little yellow if you need to, with brush strokes that either go straight up and down or side to side, like I'm making a little plus sign over and over again. We're kind of breaking up those arch-shaped plus signs. And it doesn't make a whole lot of difference here, not yet. But it really will start to make a difference when we kind of stitch together this border. There we go. That's how we get that background that looks like it's made of all these little brush strokes, but also kind of has a fade from one color to the other. It's not like a perfectly smooth gradient, but we're still kind of getting that blocky, brush strokey effect. This is not it's not a computer generated image, it's a painting, so it's going to have that kind of variance. So I'm going to keep working my way up. And the goal here is just to cover all of this ground so that every bit of the surface is either a horizontal brush stroke or a vertical brush stroke, kind of chunking those together. I like it. Like it already. And you could pull some of that darker color back down through if you want. This is really up to you how chunky you want it to be. The more you work through this, the more blended it'll be, and you'll just have this kind of like fiery sunset sky. And the more you leave it alone, the more it's going to look chunky and abstract. I'm going to go back in with a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white. I'm not even washing my brush. But just a little bit, because I like that kind of lighter color and I want to pull a little bit more through. So I'm just grabbing a little more yellow. A little yellow here and there, kind of light up the sky. And it's up to you. If you decide you want kind of a darker, redder sky, you can totally add more of that. These could be big brush strokes, small brush strokes. It's up to you. Pull some of that orange back down through here. Don't be afraid to overlap your brush strokes. Don't be afraid to cover some things up and then kind of uncover them again. Pull just a little bit of white in here. I kind of like that luminosity. Don't forget to keep kind of shifting your brush back and forth, different directions, so it's not all the same. We really want it to kind of it's almost pixelated, right? It's almost, we want it to have that blocky, painterly kind of look. All right, I think that's it for me. But one more little bit of yellow. I really like that bright yellow a lot. There we go. All right, so we do want to let this dry completely because our next step, we're going to put Lookout Mountain in and we're going to be using some blue paint. And if we go right over top of it, that blue is going to mix in with the yellow and you're going to get a very kind of green mountain. And we don't want that. We really want this to be a nice bright blue. So take your brush. This is one time you should wash your brush. Take your brush, wipe that extra paint off, just like that. I like to do that just to keep it out of my paint water, but it shouldn't make that much of a difference. Either way, and then pop that in your water and take just as long as it takes for this to dry. It might take 5 minutes, might take 10 minutes. If you're in a hurry, you could hit it with a hair dryer, that'll work just fine, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next step. Once your sky is dry, it's time to move on. We're going to paint Lookout Mountain that overlooks the city. But before you do, this is a perfect time to take a picture of your work in progress, because right now it just looks like a fiery abstract. So that's always fun. If you're going to take a picture and kind of keep track of the evolution of your painting, so you've got a fun little flip book or a story for social media, then now is the time to take that picture. I'll try to remember to remind you. We're still going to be using our 1-inch wash brush, but we do want to make sure we get all of that bright yellow and orange paint out of it. So I'm just painting the bottom of my cup with the brush, and that'll kind of suction all of that paint out of the bristles. Kind of wipe that extra water off and dab it off on a paper towel. If you see some color come off on the paper towel, then rinse it again. If there's just a little bit, don't worry about it. All right, so we're adding Lookout Mountain in here, which has a very distinctive shape. I'm going to be using my Cobalt blue, and I'm going to put just a tiny bit of white in with it, just a little bit. I don't want this to be a pastel blue, but I find that sometimes adding just a little bit of white can help make paint a little more opaque, and you don't have to cover it so many times. So blue paint varies a lot. If you've got something really dark, you may want to lighten it up quite a bit. I'm kind of thinking of the color that the Walnut Street Bridge is, that kind of blue color. It's like slightly warm blue. All right, so when I think about Lookout Mountain, I think about a Reese's peanut butter cup that's upside down. So I'm gonna kind of start with that shape, but it's like just a little bit crooked, like a squished Reese's peanut butter cup. So I'm gonna go about 1/3 of the way down my canvas, and I'm going to boldly put a slightly diagonal line, just a few degrees, right across the middle here. And I'm just gonna start with that. We're gonna kind of shape this mountain. And I'm going to make my kind of squished peanut butter cup shape. And then I'm just going to go right off the edge here, like that. Now, if you want, you could kind of draw this on. You could totally look up a picture of Lookout Mountain and kind of draw it. The nice thing is that it changes a lot depending on where you are in the city looking up at it. So however you paint it, it'll be Lookout Mountain-ish. It'll look like that from some angle, from somewhere in the city. All right. So I've got my shape here, but I want to round it just a little bit. So I'm going to kind of pull my brush back down from that peak and just kind of soften all of those angles. It's still a really angular mountain. It's got a point right up here, Point Park. And then it's just going to slide down just a little bit, and then it gets a little bit shallower about halfway down, a little bit less steep, a little softer angle. Right there. There we go. And then I'm just going to fill that in. You can always come back and workshop this a little bit later if you decide you want to refine that shape. I think I might move mine up just a little bit. I think it needs to be just a little bit taller. So I'm just going to add another little brush stroke on top. We don't want this to be too high up because we still want to be able to see that awesome fiery sky. But I want to make sure I have room for the city. pretty close. Maybe ever so slightly more pointed right there. Maybe ever so slightly more shallow right here. You can just kind of play with it. If you're painting the edges of your canvas, then now is the time to paint the edge blue as well. Just wrap that color right around. Now we want to paint blue a little further down than you think you need to. So I'm just going to kind of keep going for a few inches, just so that we've got blue in our background for when we put our next tier of the painting on and kind of have the city. We want to make sure that there's not any white down below it. We don't want any white space here. So more blue than you think you need. It doesn't really matter which direction your brush strokes go, because this is mostly just a solid color. But that's up to you. If you like that texture, you can make all your brush strokes go the same way. I've got mine kind of going different angles because I feel like that's sort of a mountainish kind of texture. There we go. Just going to slide this down just a little bit and just soften it. Again, you can always come back and workshop that later. All right, that is it for this brush. We are going to give this brush a break and move on to our 1/2 inch wash brush for the next step. So I'm going to wipe that extra paint off. Let this guy hang out in our water cup and take a break. So next I'm going to grab my 1/2 inch wash brush and I'm just going to dab that off on some paper towel so it's not too wet. We don't have to worry about this blue paint drying. I'm going to go right over top of it while it's still wet. And our next layer is going to be violet. Now my violet is really dark, so I'm going to add just a little bit of white to it. And if you don't have violet paint, but you're working with primary colors, your red and blue mixed together are going to give you a lovely violet, and you can work with that. You can make this a slightly blue violet, you can make it a kind of pinker violet. You might add a little bit of my magenta to it to warm it up a little bit. We want this to be darker than the mountain and a slightly different color. You could even make this painting in monochrome and just add a little black to your blue and make it just slightly darker. That would be fine too. Or a little, make a darker gray, that would work. We just want it to be enough contrast, and it's going to end up mixing with this blue paint too, and that's fine. So now I'm thinking about kind of the buildings in the city, and I'm just going to go back to the same kind of brush strokes we were doing up top. So they're either going to be horizontal or vertical. We're going to add one more, and they might be diagonal, like a rooftop might be diagonal. And this is really stylized. I'm not worried about making particular buildings right now. I'm not worried about them being just the right scale. I'm just saying this is the city, here in the valley. Here we are. I want it to look like different buildings. So for those angled brush strokes, kind of like a rooftop, I'm just turning my brush sideways to kind of use that edge, that diagonal edge of my brush to make. You could even make something really, really tall if you wanted. You just kind of want some up and down across here. There we go. Gonna have that skyline, and I think I want to make it just to have a little bit more interest, so you can add some more of these brush strokes here and there. There's all these buildings layered that we can see from this vantage point. This isn't a real perspective on the city either, right? We're like mixing all of the iconic things, you know, different lines of the city together. You know, maybe you have something that has a tower or a steeple on it. Maybe you have something that has, it's a little bit taller, a little bit shorter. It's a lot of buildings. This is representative though. We're not worried about it being exactly literal. So don't worry, I haven't studied a skyline map. This is not exactly realistic. All right, and then I'm just gonna kind of fill this in and work my way down, just like we did before. And I am gonna add a little white to this. I don't want it to be too dark. Well, that's a little bit light. That's okay, that's okay. It'll blend with what's on there already. So straight up and down strokes, kind of little chunkier strokes. And some diagonal ones. It's okay if this mixes with the blue. And we want to go down further than our blue. So take that down another few inches, because our next layer we're adding in some black. We're going to do the aquarium. It's really distinctive skyline, and we don't want any white space in between those buildings, so it's really important to have some background color. So I'm just going to kind of pull this down a little bit to be our background. I really do like those little chunky brush strokes. I think they give it a really, I don't know, they make it look like something three-dimensional. Make these just a little taller. Why not? And it doesn't matter exactly what color you're using here, as long as it's different enough from the color you have on your mountain that it'll show up. We want just enough contrast that we can tell that that's something different. That's it. And mine gets a little lighter as it goes down. That's okay. That's okay if you have some variation. It's a painting. Alright. If you have extra paint on your brush, you can totally just wipe that off down here. Give yourself a little extra room to work. Alright, we're ready to move on to our next layer. So this brush I'm going to rinse off just a little bit. Doesn't have to be perfectly clean. Now, our next layer, we're going to be using black paint. So this doesn't have to be completely dry, and you really can choose whichever brush you want. You can use this 1/2 inch brush, or if you want to go for it and use the bigger brush, you can totally do that as well. And we are going to start with the aquarium, that iconic kind of triangular skyline that we've got going here. So first, I am going to do an angle. I'm kind of turning my brush on a diagonal so that all of those bristles will line up with each other. Some people like to choose a tiny detail brush to do detail lines or try to get the outlines of things, but I feel like that's a lot harder. I'm going to turn my brush diagonally, and then all those bristles will line up single file, and I will get a straighter line because of that. So I'm just going to make an angle like this. Ah, it's so exciting. You got to be courageous here. And then I'm going to make another one. And then I'm going to make a stamp the opposite way, going up diagonally from this one. And then I'm going to do the mirror image. Little diagonal going down, larger diagonal going up. So it's almost like a W with the middle cut out. And then one diagonal down here. And then I'm just going to pull straight down. So I'm lining my bristles right up on that diagonal line. And I'm just pulling straight down with my black paint. There we go. I'm going to do the same with the rest of these. So I'm going to do the same here. I've got this diagonal line and I'm pulling my brush straight down just to fill that in. And then I've got my little reverse. It's almost like a check mark that's backwards. So I'm putting my brush, stamping those bristles right on top, and then I'm pulling straight down. Be careful because you're going to want to pull the opposite direction, but we want to go straight up and down, straight up and down. I'm going to do the same thing right here. Just pulling straight down. Now, if you find that your black paint is turning quite violet, you can let this dry for a minute before you move on. There we go. Got my aquarium shape in there. And then we're just going to fill in. We want our other buildings in here. And we're going to do that kind of like we did back here with either diagonal or just straight across. Lines like this. Maybe have some more buildings over here. All these rectangular buildings. And I'm just going to be using the square shape of this brush to just kind of paint in stripes to get that rectangular shape. And one thing that will make this look more realistic is to make sure that not only the tops of your buildings are different heights, but also the bottoms of them go to different depths. If they all go down to the same place, it's going to look like, I don't know, they're just cardboard boxes in a row. But it'll give the illusion of some depth if the bottom of your horizon line kind of varies a little bit as well. We don't have anything that's egregiously tall from this view, so we don't want these to be really, really long. There we go. And then we're just going to fill in the rest of the canvas with our black paint. You can use this 1/2-inch brush, or if you're feeling in a hurry, you can grab your 1-inch brush. I'm going to paint the edges as well. I like those painted edges on my canvas. I'm always proud of myself if I remember the far edge. There we go. I think sometimes it's easier to paint by pulling your brush from the back forward and kind of flicking it forward than swiping up and down. And if ever you feel like your brush is scratching and you can kind of see that canvas texture and it feels dry, it just means you need more paint. Just scoop up a lot more paint. Or a little bit of water works too. That'll help spread your paint out a little bit. It's coming together. So your goal here is to make sure that we haven't left any white space on this canvas at all. So once your canvas is completely covered with something, anything, just any color at all. Once you've finished the black paint all the way down to the bottom and you've covered the entire canvas with paint, you don't have any white space left, then congratulations, you are at your midway point. Take a well-deserved break and let your painting dry to the touch. We want this completely dry before we move on to our details. Make sure your brush is in the water so it doesn't dry out. Pause your video and then meet me back here when your painting is dry and we will make some magic happen with these details. Once your painting is completely dry, this layer is completely dry, we're ready to move on to our details. And don't forget, this is an excellent time to take a picture if you are documenting the evolution of your masterpiece. It's looking really good so far. Okay, so we are going to add in the Walnut Street Bridge next. And I'm going to use my 1/2 inch brush for this, but I'm also going to use a little bit of chalk just to give myself some guidelines. Now if you have chalk, you can use that, otherwise you can use a pencil, or you can even use a little bit of paint. I think pencil is difficult to erase on top of acrylic paint, and it's just easier to paint right over it, or to use a little bit of paint and then paint right over it, especially since our background is black. So I'm going to make 2 lines that go all the way across here. One is going to be where the top of my bridge goes, just underneath those buildings, and then I'm just going to skip down a little bit, just a couple of inches, and go all the way across a second time, just to give myself guidelines. And one of the great things about chalk on canvas is you can just wipe it right off with a wet paper towel or even a dry brush, but that just gives me some guidelines. All right, so first things first, I'm going to mix just a little bit of white in with my blue, just like I did before. This might be a tiny bit lighter than the mountain, not much, but just a little bit. We want it to stand out against this black. And I'm gonna go all the way across on my lower line, not the top one, but on the lower one. And I'm just gonna cover that right up. And since I have that chalk line on there, I don't really have to think about where I'm painting, I'm just following over. And I went all the way across. Go ahead and follow through, even if you feel like you're running out of paint. It's like golf or baseball or bowling. There we go. Gotta follow through. And then you can always go back over it like that. All right, now we're gonna divide this. We're gonna do 3 sections of the bridge, and I'll show you with chalk first. You could get really technical and measure this if you want, but I'm just gonna kind of estimate, and I'm gonna find where maybe 1/3 of the way across is, roughly. Maybe that's just a little bit further this way. And then I'm gonna put a letter V right here at each of those marks, and then a 1/2 a letter V on the edge, and that gives us that really distinctive shape of the Walnut Street Bridge. Now I'm going to go over top of those, not doing this part in the middle, and I'll show you how easily that erases. You can take just a little bit of damp paper towel, make sure there's not paint on it, and just wipe right off, and that extra chalk will just disappear. Won't even be able to see it. You could wait till the very end of your painting to do this, or you can clean it up if you like to have those guidelines. And once again, you could do it without guidelines, or you could use pencil. Either way. Now, I am turning my brush sideways, so all those bristles line up single file. Just like that. I'm just going to do it's like a long dotted line. Do these tops of the bridge all the way across, and then I'm going to go back in and do my V shapes. You could do this with a smaller brush too, if you want. I just like using a square brush where I can get all those bristles to line up single file. I feel like I get a straighter line that way than I do with a round brush. All right. Now this is it's still a painting. This is a little technical, but it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, so don't worry too much about that. Now brushes are your personal choice, so if you want to reach for your tiny detail brush now to do the next part, you can. I'm going to keep using this one. We want to put a little of that texture of all those different architectural trusses in here, and to do that, I'm going to put my brush right here at the crux of our Reese's Peanut Butter Cup shape. These really are a peanut butter cup shape, unlike Lookout Mountain, which is much more organic looking. This really is a peanut butter cup shape, and I'm going to start right here at the vortex and just flick my brush down. I'm not really even worried about making it all the way. I'm going to do one right in the middle as well. You just kind of want to show those supports a little bit. So I'm just kind of flicking my brush down right in the middle and then right on the sides like that. And then I'm gonna put one of those trusses kind of in the middle as well, in between each of those. So we end up with five little lines marking in between. Yeah, 5 little vertical lines across each section of the bridge. And then there's also a lot of diagonals. Now obviously we're simplifying this here. We're not doing all of the different architectural structures on the Walnut Street Bridge, but we still want to get that distinctive look. So I'm gonna add some diagonals here, almost like the letter W. I'm gonna start right here at the corner and kind of angle down, and in the middle I'm gonna angle both ways. It's just a little zigzag. It's almost like an X going over top of these verticals that we have here. And you'll note that I'm not worried about connecting them all the way or making them just so. We're gonna add lights on top. They're gonna look really luminous. So it doesn't have to be perfectly detailed. And now we've got to do those pylons, those supports underneath the bridge. And so to do that, I'm just gonna make one little mark straight down, little square brush stroke, and a little half a one right here. Support that edge of the bridge too. And I want to make these just a little bit wider, almost like I'm making like the letter A. A little brush stroke kind of to the right and to the left. It's kind of flat on the bottom. There we go. They're angled just a little bit. And then there's also kind of a little ledge or kind of cross beam underneath. And so I'm just gonna add just a little mark on either side, or a little line that goes across each one. There we go. You can make those a little taller. You can make them a little shorter. Just something, just so we can see that that's where they're supported and it's not just floating there right in the middle. And if you want, you can go back over this. Sometimes it takes 2 coats when you're painting with a color on top of black. So if you feel like you need to add an extra coat on here to really make it pop, don't hesitate to do that. I think I'm gonna add just a little more. Just go just over the tops of the bridge here. Perfect. And then we want there to be a little bit of a reflection here. I am going to kind of make some side-to-side dash marks underneath this bridge. I don't want them to really touch my supports, but I'm just gonna add kind of zigzagging down just a little bit of blue, like it's the reflection in the water of those supports. There we go. And we'll add some more reflections in later that will reflect our vibrant colors of the sky. This is really more of a shadow than a reflection, where just there's blue on the water. That's so exciting. Okay. All right, let's see. It is time to add our lights. So for that, I'm going to use my smaller brush. So I'm going to give my 1/2 inch flat brush a little break in the water and reach for my little detail brush next. I'm gonna dry that off a little bit. And we're gonna work kind of from light to dark here. First, I'm going to add some yellow right on top of the aquarium just to make that pop. And you might find that you want to add just a tiny bit of white to your yellow, just so that it really stands out, depending on how translucent your paint is. And I'm just going to outline the very tops of these. I'm going to start at the top and just pull one brush stroke down. Do the same thing on these, both sides. It really pops off of that background. I love that, that's exciting. And then I'm also going to add just a few windows, some different buildings here. And I'm going to do this just by making some little dots. Maybe some of them are taller, maybe some of them are shorter. just anywhere you want in these buildings. Because there's stuff happening in here in Chattanooga, right? There's things going on. So we got all of those lights going. Oh, I like that. That makes me happy. And then I'm going to grab some orange next. You can either mix that with red and yellow, or if you have some fire red, you can use that. We've got, the aquarium kind of has some lights horizontally on it too, on the side. So I'm just going to pull from the side and just make a couple of little marks across the edge like this. Just to kind of show that architecture. There we go. And I think we'll have some orange lights here too. You know, they're a little warmer. They can be near the yellow, or they can be separate from it. Maybe we'll even do some on the tops of the buildings. Oh, I like that. Kind of cuts it out from the background. Just anywhere you want to add those little extra pops of color. There's all kinds of things happening down here on the downtown and on the riverfront. I think maybe I'll even add a little bit of blue, just to kind of tie it in with our bridge and our background. So you'll want to wash your brush between orange and blue, but you can absolutely add some blue here and there. I like the blue for the windows too. Somebody's watching a good movie in there. Now we don't want to get too close to the bridge. There we go. Not to compete with it, but oh, I like that. I like having just a little bit, just a little touch here and there of that blue. Excellent, excellent. So up to you. You get to decide how much detail to add there. Now we've already got our blue reflection in the water, but we're gonna add some other colors as well. So I'm gonna start with my yellow once again. We're gonna kind of work around our palette just like we did with the lights. Yellow, maybe with a tiny bit of white in it. And we're gonna show where kind of the light from our sunset and light from the city is reflecting in the water. So in between these supports, we've got these 3 sections, and I'm just gonna do the same thing and make some horizontal strokes that they don't have to be perfectly flat. It's almost like I'm just gonna zigzag my way down, like making a really flat letter Z. There we go. Just a little bit. And it's in between where we've got the blue going. There we go. And then I'm gonna work around my palette and grab a little of my orange next. I'm just gonna add some of that in there. It's like we're doing the reverse of our sky. I stitch that in between where we've got the blue and the black. Oh, I like that a lot. And then finally, I'm going to grab some of my magenta, or you can use bright red for that as well. And I'm just going to go all the way down to the bottom. That's our sunset color reflecting in the water. There we go. Maybe just a little more. I really like that bright magenta in there. Just really pops. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. I'm just kind of threading it through. So we can still see some of the black and we can definitely see the blue in between, but we've got that little bit of a reflection. All right, I'm rinsing off my brush. And we are gonna add some lights on the bridge. All right, to do this, first things first, I'm going to grab my yellow and I'm just gonna add a little bit of a highlight line that goes over the top of the bridge. So we used a thicker line before to do this, and now I'm just gonna draw right through the middle. I do think it helps to have sound effects. Going down that V shape and then all the way across. And I'm kind of pulling from the corners in. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be every inch of it. Just something to kind of show the light reflecting off of it. And there are lights on the bridge, and we're gonna add those as well. I think I'll pull some of this yellow down through my vertical supports as well. So anywhere you have one of those. Yeah, really starting to kind of pop now off that black background. Perfect. So I'm not going all the way down. I'm not worried about connecting this or making it look super realistic, but these kind of layers of different colors on top of the lines are what's really going to make it look three-dimensional and look like it's really lit up. All right, I think I'm gonna put a little row of lights across the bottom of the bridge here. You could get detailed and put the railing or people walking on it or whatever you'd like to do, but I'm gonna put a dot kind of right where each of these V's meet. And then I think I'll put a dot underneath each one of my little vertical supports. So I'm just gonna bisect each one and put a dot in the middle, and then I'll go back and put a dot in between each of those. Yeah. You could add some more if you want to. I like that. We kind of got some extra lights, and then we gotta put some lights on the top. But the lights on the top are definitely brighter. They've got to stand out. So I'm gonna use white for those. And I'm gonna put a dot right on the corner, on each of these corners. Love it. And then, yeah, let's go ahead and put one on top of each one of those vertical supports. And I'm just kind of stamping. If you're trying to get that perfectly round dot, these aren't perfectly round. Mine definitely aren't. But you can always stamp with the back of your brush as well. That's a fun way to stamp a little dot. I kind of like that these are a little soft. I think it makes them look a little more glowy. And I think, oh, let's put a light maybe halfway down, because there's some lights halfway down on these angled supports as well. And maybe, let's see, we'll do a couple of them in here as well, halfway down. So kind of got a line going all the way across of these white lights. Very luminous. I like it. It looks like it's glowing. And then we're gonna put some stars in the sky. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm using my tiny detail brush, or you could totally stamp this with the back end of your brush if you want perfectly round dots. And I'm just gonna add a few stars up here in the sky. I'm kind of angling my brush different ways. I think the hardest part about stars is you want them to kind of be random and not super orderly. And if I'm not concentrating, I'll end up making polka dots and putting them in a grid. So go ahead and you can give them little friends. I feel like that helps to kind of make a random pattern. Well, those two are friends. Maybe those two aren't. So that one's a little further away. You can put as many stars as you want. I'm focusing on up high and kind of having those stars in the darker area of the sky. So wherever your sky is darkest, that's where you want to concentrate these. They won't show up as well lower down. You can put a couple lower down, but they won't really show up as well on the yellow. I think that looks great. And they can be different sizes too, obviously. Oh, it's definitely, it's addictive. I could keep going. but I won't. It's up to you. You decide how many stars you want on your painting. I think this looks fantastic. So now is the part where you kind of take stock, decide where you might need a little more something here, something there, a little bit of extra detail, and then of course our final step is to sign it. Very important step. When you decide your painting is completely finished and you're ready to call it done, then you've got to put your seal of approval on it. You've got to sign it. That is the most important step of a painting. I know for me, if I don't sign my painting, I'll continue working on it forever. So make your mark, make it yours, and you can do that any way you want. You can use your little tiny detail brush. Some people like to use a Sharpie. That's always a good way to sign a painting as well. Or you can use a fingerprint or a thumbprint. Or if you're like me and you like to tell your painting that you've had a marvelous time and you want it to call you, you can give your painting a kiss. So I think I'm going to do that this time, because I've had a delightful time with this painting. It's not a bad color. I love you, painting. Perfect. That's all for this painting. Thank you so much for joining me. Once again, I'm Amy for Nooga Studio, and I hope that you enjoyed painting beautiful Chattanooga as much as I did. To find out more about events that we've got popping up in and around Chattanooga and online, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Nooga Studio. And speaking of social media, if you painted along with me tonight, I would absolutely love it if you would snap a selfie with your painting. Make sure you tag me so that I can celebrate your art making with you. I look forward to seeing you next time, and until then, happy Startup Week, everybody, and happy painting!